Well, good afternoon, everyone. Um, Good to see you, one way at least. What a beautiful day outside. I just went walking and upper 40s, bright sunshine. If you're wondering why I talk about the weather so much, it's because I lived in Chicago for over 20 years and rarely do you get uh, a number of days in the middle of January above 40. And so it's a blessing, and I'm grateful to God for being able to live in such a beautiful area. Um, and so today we're continuing our series on the kingdom of God, and we're still in Genesis, and we'll be in Genesis for a long time. And then we'll be in the Gospels for a good bit of time, and then a little bit in Revelation with a couple studies in between. But those are our huge plotline turning points. So they require the amount of time investment. So today we're looking at the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel, I think it's been shortchanged. Well, we don't study it enough. It seems a little bit offbeat. And so we look at the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden, but we don't really talk about or think about the fall of society in the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel and the fall within the garden are tightly knit and parallel. One is the fall of individuals, Adam and Eve, that it affected everyone. But then the Tower of Babel is the fall of society. It is the fall of a nation. And it is, in a sense, the rising of the kingdom of the world or the kingdom of darkness. So it's kingdom language, whereas the fall of Adam and Eve tends to be a little bit more individual driven. So we want to take a look at that, and this is a crucial passage. And so let's see, we want to share screen, and then 1 second as we start the slideshow from the beginning. Yes, so we have the kingdom of God here that we were continuing, and hopefully you'll see how it parallels our Sunday morning worship. And we're a little ahead of the Sunday morning, but we'll catch up pretty quickly. And Sunday will be more devotional type approach to the plot line, whereas on our Sunday school, it'll be a little bit more theological plot line driven. So this is the major point that we want to look at today. Babel, Tower of Babel, signifies the kingdom of this world, which rises up against the kingdom of God. So that the two lines of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve, even before then, before Adam and Eve, well, after Adam and Eve fell, you had God's promise that the seed of the woman will arise and will be in conflict with the offspring of the serpent. So these two lines form those who are in the kingdom of God and those who are not. And so those two lines, when you trace it through Genesis 1 to 11, end up with those who are in the Tower of Babel and those who are in the family of Abraham. So chapter 11 and chapter 12 are tightly connected, and I'll show you how as we move forward. So how are these stories connected? Story of Adam and Eve on the left, story of Babel on the right are tightly connected. So the first one is the fall of individuals. Second one is the fall of society. Now, in both stories, the commandment of God is violated. So as you're familiar, in chapter 3, God commanded Adam and Eve not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but Eve took its fruit and ate and gave it to Adam, and he ate. So you have the verses down there. But in Genesis 9, you have Noah after the flood. God blesses them. Remember, this goes back to Adam and Eve, right? Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. They were to go and spread out and expand the reign of God over all of earth. So Genesis 9, verse 1. But if you look at chapter 11, verse 4, these are the people that built the Tower of Babel. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. For two reasons. One, let us make a name for ourselves. And secondly, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth. So it seems like these people want to stay together and not spread out and not subdue and have exercise dominion over all the earth on behalf of God. So commands of God are violated in both stories. And then secondly, unique, but God refers to himself in the first person plural. So after the eating of the fruit and the punishment declared, chapter 3, verse 22, God says, the man has become like one of us. And that's a very unique phrase. How should we understand that? And there are different interpretations, but it is unique. If you look on the right side, chapter 11, come, let us go down and there confuse their language. In verse 7, the first person plural used of God once again. I believe the only other time is Isaiah 6 when God is speaking to Isaiah. So not a lot of occurrences, but here we see in both stories, God using first person plural of himself. Third, we have human potential acknowledged, or humans develop a capacity or increase their capacity for something. So chapter 3:22, after the eating of the fruit, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Exactly what that is, we have a little bit of debate. I shared my thoughts in one of the earlier Bible studies, but now human beings have an additional capacity than they had before to know good and evil. Now, on the right side, human potential increased, where God says of humanity, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Something that had occurred, perhaps the experience of uniting together for a common purpose, whatever it was, but greater potential is realized in both stories. Or there's a movement eastward. Now, this is very interesting, but in the early chapters of Genesis and to the midsections as well, movement out towards the east is symbolic of movement away from God, and more of self-dependence, self-sufficiency. So we see this in chapter 3, verse 24, he drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim. So they were pushed out eastward. And then in chapter 11, verse 2, and as people migrated from the east, so they're moving eastward. Now, it's same thing with Cain. After God had put a curse on him and he was sent out, he went to the east of Eden, outward that way, towards east. And then Lot as well, when he chose land, when Abraham and Lot, their possessions gotten too much and they wanted to separate, Abraham allowed Lot first choice and he moved eastward. And we know the story where he went to Sodom and then losing his wife and daughters and tremendous suffering there. But eastward is a movement away from God in both of these stories. And then fifth, both of the motivation for eating or disobedience towards God is driven by an act of pride. So the temptation that the serpent gives towards Eve, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And so a temptation to be elevated, prideful. And then in chapter 11, verse 4, one of the motivations for building the tower, and let us make a name for ourselves to increase, to build up one's reputation, to be praised. So you have both of these motivations. So I believe these two stories there are nicely, tightly packed together. Now, the building of the tower that stretches upward is an act of human achievement and pride. And I think that's true even today. So, there are a number of competitions among cities and countries for who has the tallest building. So you have the Empire State Building, the Freedom Building, the World Finance Center, and then I think Burj Khalifa out in Dubai. And then the Kingdom Tower is in the same area. And it's, I think, partially built, but I think it was the 2008 crisis that they have stopped building at the moment. They're wondering if they would increase or not. But, how high can you build these buildings? So there's a lot of competition, and these buildings that reach to the heavens seem symbolic of human achievement, their ability to solve problems. And so here's one that's proposed. It's the 2-mile-high Ultima Tower, and that's the architect is Eugene Sue, and he had proposed this in 1991. And it's this humongous tower that could house 1 million people. 1 million people could live in that building, according to where it's designed. And it was supposed to be built in San Francisco, if it ever got built. It would be built in San Francisco, and it would have 500 stories, and it would be a testament to human achievement to build these things and how high can you go? And so the Tower of Babel is this symbol of human achievement to reach into the very heavens. And then the counterpart to this is Abraham. So the Tower of Babel will be the line of the offspring of the serpent, and then Abraham and his descendants will be the seed of the woman. So here, chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, you have the second line. It's connected by the making the name great. So starting in verse 1, now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and then right in the middle, right? And I will bless you and make your name great. So it seems to be two kinds of people who go out and attempt to make a name for themselves, and then those who are gifted a great name by God. And then I'll just finish the passage on the right. So that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So that you have these two lines here. And then you have the structure. So I want to take a look at the structure of the Tower of Babel passage, the 9 verses in Genesis 11. And it's divided into two sections with a bridging text, so that on the first part, verses 1 to 4, you have the construction of the tower by man. And so you have the key phrase, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. So that's the first half. The second half is verses 6 to 9, and it's the deconstruction of the tower by God. And so the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth. And so what you have, there's a little bit of irony. You have the people who wanted to stay together and build this tower and perhaps live together in that tower as one people group, sort of like a 2-mile ultimate tower. But then what happens is that they end up being dispersed over all of the earth, so that what they did not want actually occurred. But here's the second irony, the middle part, verse 5, chapter 11, and the Lord came down to see. Now, it's almost comic here in that these people are building a tower to reach the heavens, but they don't get that far up, so that when God wanted to see what they were doing, he had to come down from heaven to see. So it speaks to the deficiency of human power in building a tower that will reach into the very heavens. So that's the key middle point. And we can see this once again, but this is a chiastic structure, so that it's nested. And you can see that the top line and the bottom line, the language of the whole world, or the whole world had one language, you have that. And then if you come into one loop, inner loop, you have verse 2 and verse 8, there and from there. And then 3 and 7, you have each other. And then in verse 3, come, let us make bricks. And then in verse 7, come, let us confuse. And then verse 4, come, let us build. And then verse 5, that the men were building. And then verse 4, a city with a tower, and then a city and the tower, verse 5. So you have this parallel inner loop. And then in chiastic structures, the key line is usually the innermost line. And the innermost line is the Lord came down. So once again, the tower wasn't that high, and God had to come down from heaven to be able to see it. So that what we have here is the failure of human being to be able to build a kingdom of God that replicates the kingdom that God is able to build. So in one sense, any attempt to build the kingdom of this world is an attempt to replicate the harmony of the Garden of Eden, but men fail in their attempt to do so. And it is only God who can replicate it, so that when you go to New Jerusalem in Revelation 21 and 22, we have the picturing of the Garden of Eden back at the very end, meaning God, what he had started, it took a detour because of Adam and Eve's failure, but then God is the one who was able to finally rebuild his kingdom, and it will look like the Garden of Eden. But when men attempt to do so, they cannot replicate the garden. And so they fall short of their target of building a tower that will reach into the very heavens. So in one sense, it's just like 1 Corinthians, I think 17:18, Paul says the wisdom of God, the wisdom of man is like the foolishness of God, so that even the most intellectual and wise of human beings is mere foolishness to God. And then the kingdom of this world, this tower into the very heavens, when God looks down, it looks so puny that he has to come down to look at it. And so we have this kingdom of the world that emerges, and then it will be a constant battle back and forth between these kingdoms, and then played out in a major way in the temptation account between Satan and Jesus. And then the final huge playing out is in Revelation between the Antichrist and the beast, with Christ and the church. Here, I want to look at the lineage. So when you look at the early chapters of Genesis 1 to 11, you have these genealogies. And genealogies are attempt to show that there are two lines of humanity. One that follows the offspring of the serpent, and then one that follows the seed of the woman, and they're in conflict. So like Cain and Abel, they are in constant conflict. So when Cain kills Abel, it's replaced by Seth. And then these are the two lines: Cain, who is a murderer, who has the spirit of Satan, who is a murderer from the beginning, John chapter 10. So the two lines come down to Noah, who from last week, Noah is from the line of the seed of the woman. His name means to rest. So God starts over with Noah, but the competing line, the offspring of the serpent, they're all drowned, so that God starts fresh. He's recreating, and from Noah's descendants. And then you have that split there between Ham and Canaan, Canaan who is cursed, and then Shem, who, the line through whom God will continue bringing his descendants or his offsprings that will produce the kingdom of God. And then Joktan and Peleg, so we'll see that in this next slide. And then after, from Peleg was Terah, and then Abraham. So Abraham is the key there. And from Abraham will come David and the Messiah. So you have the seed of the woman on the right and the seed of the serpent on the left, and the Antichrist will be, which will come up in Revelation. And one of the key passages there, I'm sorry, it got cut off a little bit, in 1025, to Eber was born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, and then for in his days the earth was divided, and then his brother's name was Jocham. So this is a major split here. And it's foreshadowed or indicated by, for in his days the earth was divided. Just as the earth was divided, so the people group are divided into the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. So we see this in the next slide. On the right side, when Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg, and Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. Now, notice this is chapter 11, verse 16, which is after the Tower of Babel account. But if you look at before the Tower of Babel account, chapter 10, verse 25, to Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, Joktan's line is traced on the left. Peleg's line is traced on the right, but this is after the Tower of Babel scene. And so you see two different genealogies, one tracing the seed of the woman and one tracing the seed of the serpent. So Joktan fathered a number of these individuals, and all these were the sons of Joktan in verse 29. And so there appears to be a major split between the sons of Eber. One that's the seed of the serpent, and I'm assuming those who built the Tower of Babel. And then after the Tower of Babel, Peleg, and from him comes Terah, and then from Terah comes Abraham in chapter 12, verse 1 and on. And Abraham is the key individual through whom God will covenant to recreate the heavens and earth, not by destroying it. Remember the covenant of um, Noah, where the rainbow is the sign of the covenant, that he will not destroy the earth in that way through water, but through Abraham, he will recreate the heavens and the earth. And so it would be a different kind of recreation, not by destruction in the same way as he did with Noah. And so we have Abraham, who will emerge next week's Bible study as the key figure, the father of the children of God. Now, I want to do this before we end. The cycle of the story, and you've seen this chart in the sermon that I preached a couple of weeks ago on the nature of stories and narrative. And there are 5 parts. You got the initial ideal state, tragedy, the fall, something that occurred that disrupts the idyllic state of the initial story, and then the unideal state on the bottom. What's wrong with the situation, the tension that has to be resolved, and then redemption, some kind of movement that reverses the tragedy, so that in the very end, you have replication of the initial ideal state, but it's better because the characters have overcome tragedy. Their character has grown, they learned stamina, love was expressed, sacrifice was made. So you have these 5 parts. And we also looked at how the Bible fits into this, because the Bible is a comedy. The resolution reverses the effects of the tragedy. So at the end, you have the good that's left. And so on the left, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which Adam eats and rejects his sonship, his identity as a child of God. And then because he did this, so you have the wilderness, the cursing of the land. And then on the right side, you have Jesus, who goes in the wilderness and he overcomes temptation, sacrifices himself by being obedient as a son. And then at the very end, and the end of the ages, a new garden, New Jerusalem is created. Now you have this. So what I want to do is show you how the Tower of Babel is now paralleled by scenes on the other side of the storyline, the plot line. So, Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and so they're individuals that fall, and Jesus going to the wilderness would parallel that. But the Tower of Babel, where all have gathered together and they speak one language, and then God scatters them, well, it's Pentecost. So on the right side, when Peter, the fire, the Spirit comes upon the disciples, and then Peter goes out and he preaches, remember? And then he preaches and he speaks in tongues, and the people wonder, well, is he drunk or not? And then God gives each of those people who were diaspora, the Jews that have been scattered all over that area, have come together in Jerusalem to celebrate, to have come together. And then Peter is preaching, and as he preaches, each individual hears Peter in his own language. So each one of them speaks a different language, but they hear Peter the same message in each one of their languages. So the diaspora all gather together in Jerusalem, which is the counterpart to the city of Babel, and everyone speaking different languages understand Peter in their own language, but the same message. So that's the reversal effect. And then the Tower of Babel, the reversal effect is New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. So, you have the Tower of Babel, they're building a tower to the heavens, the kingdom of man, the kingdom of this world. But the New Jerusalem is the kingdom of God, and it's coming down from heaven. It's just like God came down to see, he's sending New Jerusalem down to earth, and he himself will come and reside together with human beings. And so you have these tight connections between plotline points in the tragedy downward fall that aligns with the redemption outward movement. Now, the last thing that I want to do this is a picture of the Tower of Babel, as scholars think, not Tower of Babel, Babylon. Babylon, as scholars think it would look like a beautiful tower, a beautiful city, known for their high walls and their gardens. It's supposed to have magnificent gardens. In fact, one of the seven wonders, the Hanging Garden, is in Babylon. So the Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar reigning over it. And so you have this magnificent city, and Babel and Babylon are connected together. So Babel is the Hebrew word for confusion, and it's just transliterated. It's Babel, Babel, for confusion. So God confused the language. But Babylon is a Greek translation of Babel. So it's really a reference to the same city. It's the same name. And throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, Babylon becomes a symbol that represents any cooperative human attempt to build a better world without God. It's to establish the kingdom of earth, the kingdom of man, the kingdom of darkness. I'm going to say it just one last time. Babel, Babylon is symbolic of any cooperative attempt made by human beings in order to replicate a better world, a paradise, a utopia, but without God, in their own strength, in their own power, through scientific advancement, through their own wisdom, technology. And so when we come to Revelation, Babylon is huge because this is the final conflict between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. And I'm just going to point out three things because toward end of March, we're going to go into Revelation. But there are three things about Babylon, just keep in mind. So Babylon stands against God and his people because of the kingdom of darkness. It wants to swallow up the people of God. It's like a lion roaring, ready to devour the people of God. So chapter 17, verse 5 of Revelation, and on her forehead. So John is caught up by the Spirit, and John sees this woman, and on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. So those who are non-religious or religiously against God. So these are prostitutes who have walked away from God. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So Babylon throughout the history of Old Testament, New Testament, is the kingdom of Satan that seeks to conquer the people of God. And then the second thing is they're commercial powerhouses. So Babylon is rich, it's luxurious, and all of the merchants are doing business with it. And so I'll just read the passage here. It's chapter 18, verse 11. And the merchants of the earth wept and mourned for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore, because Babylon was going to be destroyed by God. Cargo of gold, silver, jewel, pearl, fine linen, and on and on. All these articles of ivory, costly wood, bronze, and all this spice, incense, flour, horses, chariots, and slaves. That is human beings, human souls. So this is an economic powerhouse, and the fruit for which your soul long has gone from you, and all your delicacies and splendors are lost to you and never be found again, as God destroys the city. And oh boy, verse 16, as for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, pearls, for in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste, as the kingdom of God destroys the kingdom of darkness. But this is an economic powerhouse, and they're rich. And then lastly, you have the gathering of all the people. So the Babylon in Revelation is a uniting force where all the kings of the earth come together and pledge loyalty to Babylon, so that rather than being scattered out, they're being united together. And so verse 9, and the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning, and they will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city, Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. Now, when you look at Babylon, it has tight parallels with Babel, because Babel was the initial starting point for that imagery of a cooperative effort to rebuild a paradise, a kingdom without God's power. And so Babel was a commercial powerhouse because they have the funds to be able to build this tower that reaches the heavens. And then secondly, rather than being scattered, they gather all the people together so they will not be dispersed. They're united in purpose. And then lastly, they're rebellious to God in the sense that they are making a name for themselves. They're disobeying God. And then as time will go, we'll see this line, the offspring of the serpent will seek to overcome and undermine the people of God, the rebellious to God and his people. And it'll become more evident as we trace this plot line. So that structurally, we have this, the structure that we're going to trace to the plot line, this cooperative effort to build paradise in their own strength and power apart from God, and that's Babylon. And then on the right, you have the kingdom of light, the kingdom of God, where you don't make a name for yourself, but God gives you a name. And through him, by faith, when you build this kingdom, it will become the final kingdom of God in the end, New Jerusalem, which will come down from heaven, meaning that it will be an act of grace by God to recreate, restore this world into one where it reflects the Garden of Eden. So hopefully this is all making sense. If you have questions, you can send me an email. But next Bible study, we will look at Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, which is huge. And from there, we'll see God's redemptive plan being played out with greater clarity. Well, I hope you enjoyed the day today, and I hope we see everybody on Sunday worship. Thank you.